Hi everyone, I'm Joey. Welcome back to the second part in this chair making video. Now, obviously the world's gone crazy since, it has been crazy, it's still crazy, I'm not sure, since the last part. So I've been doing bits and pieces of this chair making work. I just had to remind myself where we got up to, so I just watched the last part of the video. So really I just made the mock-up and started breaking down some of the parts of the chairs. So what I'm up to now, I just machined up a whole bunch more pieces of veneer, and they're being glued up in the same forms as the chair rails, and this is for the lower back rail of the chair, which is this part here. You can see here on the sawhorse I've got all of the hoops made and formed all the tenons with the multi-router. Over here we've got all the parts of the chairs ready to go. I'm still just working my way through finish sanding and shaping the legs. And I have got to the point of gluing up some of the front rails. Right now I'm working on putting a bead on one of the hoops, and I was going to try and glue one of the front leg assemblies onto the seat hoop to see if that's even possible. So I'm just using my Lee Nelson beading tool. Alright, so this is one of my front leg assemblies, which I glued up before lockdown, I think, this one. And I managed to get this bead pretty nicely on this curved rail. So in theory, this is going to fit. Okay, so this is the front leg assembly, and the tenon coming through comes into this mortise. Right, you can just see it there in that back corner by about 1/2 mil, and that's stopping the curved rail tenons from going all the way down. So I could pretty easily just get a chisel in there and pare away just the tip of that tenon, and then I don't have to shorten the tenon on the curved rail, which would be not ideal. So what's on the outside? Right, that's right. So where the knee of the cabriole leg meets the vertical member, sometimes you get this little step here, and that's just part of the bandsawing process, and I try as hard as I can not to run off my line at that point. But sometimes if it's the second side you've cut, it's very difficult to actually be right on your line, because the offcuts from the cabriole leg shift around a bit and whatever. So sometimes you have this. So I just carve it down and flush it up. And you don't have to worry too much if it's only on one side and the other side you don't have to do it. The thing with cabriole legs is they're all different. And it's very hard to spot inconsistencies like this. It's near impossible unless you've got two right next to each other and you can touch them, feel them, and feel the curves. So now that is pretty well sorted out, I can just get in there with a sanding block and just clean up that little corner, if I can. So at this point, so the legs I haven't mentioned have just been bandsawed and then roughly cleaned up with my little bobbin sander, drum sander. So this shaping is almost there. But the most important thing to do at this point is just to feel it. And I can feel that there's a high lump here and a slight hollow here, which I can clean that up. And on this particular leg, this curve all the way through to here doesn't feel too bad. But right here, high point. Feels much better. There has to be a transition at this point from over to under. You just want to smooth that out as best as possible. Unfortunately I've got this little tight knot here. Which can make things a bit tricky for shaping. That feels much better transition. And I'm going to come back, work the other way. The other thing with cabriole legs, while we always try and work with the grain, with hand planes, hand tools, the grain direction doesn't matter so much as the taper direction of the cut in this case. And so you want to work with mainly with the taper direction rather than the grain direction. So at that point, the shape's pretty good. And the most important tool here is a nice sharp card scraper. This really finishes most of the work. It was about this time that I realized I needed to start getting on to making the forms for the back splat. So we carved this big mold out of some plywood on the CNC, so we can then bend some plywood around it. Here's the mold, cleaned up a little bit. I've got this giant hunk of ash that was meant to be a turning, which never happened, so it makes a really good kind of small table. We then cut kind of a B part, the opposite of the mold, which is great at this end. And I've done one test dry fit, and it clamps up the two bits of plywood we're going to use really nicely, just leaving a small amount of pressure needed at this end. This clamp seems to do almost all of the work necessary. So I'm just going to mount this mold to this pedestal here so I can get around it, and I'm going to do a test glue up and see if it works. So I'm using DAP Wildwood urea resin glue. It's a formaldehyde based glue. It dries like rock. That's what I've been using for all the curved members of the chairs so far. It's got a very long dry time, which is a little annoying because I have to do 12 of these. It's essentially 12 days, but it really seems to be the best product for the job. I've mixed some up. Let's get it on there and see what happens. So anyone who doesn't know, this glue comes as a fine powder, and it's a 5:2 ratio. You add some water to it, so it's a very small amount of water for this mix. I did 5 tablespoons of powder and 2 tablespoons of water. and that seems to be a really good mix. Good thing with this glue is you do have quite a bit of time to play with it. I mean, it will stay fluid in the pot for 2 or 3 hours. I think working time is considerably shorter, maybe half an hour. Depends on the temperature, I suppose. So I would go through that process once every morning for 12 days. In the meantime, I can carry on with other things, and here we are getting on with cutting out the top back rails and kind of working on the parts involved in that. So there's a little bit of wobble with the bandsawn face of the chair backs, the top of the back. And I'm just really going to do it by feel until it feels like it's a nice even curve. And I'm not looking for a perfect finish here at this point. I'm looking to even out any ups and downs. And there's just some minor variations that you would feel when you pick the chair up and kind of feel the chair. So I'm just going to spoke shave any high points, and then I'll come at it with the card scraper and finish it that way, and then a little bit of sandpaper. Now with some of the front leg and hoop assemblies glued up, I could make a template for the actual seat and then copy that 12 times, and this will be what I send off to the upholsterer at the end to finish off. Okay, we're looking at my panto router here. I've just spent probably the last 2.5 hours getting this jig to be reasonable. So after I've cut these bottom rails, and they've got their compound cut on the end, I can place them in the jig, and there's a mark on the bottom of these, so I just need to make sure I'm where I need to be. So the table is tilted at 4 degrees and the piece of work is at a 30-degree angle, although it's really just relative to that plumb cut which is there. The rest of this doesn't really matter. So I should be now able to cut the tenon on the end of there. Should be able to glue that back on there. Should be alright. So I'm just waiting for the glue to dry on the last 2 of these, and then I'll catch those 2 up to where these are, which is why I've only done a tenon on one end, because I'll leave my setup as it is till tomorrow morning, and then I'll finish the ends with all of them, all 12 of these at the same time. In the meantime, I've been working on the setup to cut a groove in the top of this curved rail so I can fit that compound plywood back splat into it. And this setup seems to work pretty good. So I'm just going to follow my piece on the apex with the center line in line with the center of the bit, and then I've got a feather board which I've destroyed and screwed to my plywood backing on my fence, so I can move my whole fence and feather board in and out. And then so the feather board's going to hold the working piece to my rounded end. I've done a test piece. It still wants to, I need to be careful because as I rock around like this, it's going to cause waves in the piece. So I just need to be as gentle as I can with how I move this. But it does work. There we have a pretty even curve which will fit somehow, will fit my plywood, and the groove is oversized because I've got to allow for a bit of upholstery. So I've got the bottom rail tenons done. The trick is putting the corresponding mortise into the leg, the back leg. So I've come up with this crazy jig where my panto rod is hanging off the side of my table, so I can stick my leg all the way through. Clamp it into place. And then I can make the mortise where needed. That particular footage, however, is missing. This is another mortise which goes at the top of the leg. I can then add in these little tiny tenons, and that's going to hold the back top rail in place. It's hard to see, but the little tenon I glued in is just here. I've got the groove on each end of the chair back, and it slides down into place quite nicely, maybe like that. So that gives a lot of strength to the chair back, and it will be held in place by a screw through each end there. That way the upholstery panel can be replaced if need be. So with those 6 chairs glued up, I could then move on to working on the 6 chairs with the armrests, and so this is what you're seeing here. I'm starting to make the mortises and tenons for the pieces of the armrests. Okay, so I'm making this part, which is the kind of riser for the armrest. The arm is going to come on something like that. So I need to form a tenon on the top of my blanks to get it up into the bottom of the armrest. So I've just done just made this kind of rebate here. I can't remember how I made these because this template was made so long ago, but I'm going to trace these out. I've obviously got a left and a right hand version. I'm going to trace these out and then I can form my tenon on the top, and then I'll bandsaw the rest of the shape out and sand it off. That's the plan. Right, I just glued up this arm. It's the first armrest to be glued up. Pretty amazing amount of work involved in making these two pieces. So I'm going to glue this one up and then do the next 5. Now the joinery on this off the panto router is so tight, which is good, but I actually think it's maybe slightly too tight. I probably should have gone a fraction looser just so I can actually get some glue, and especially in this joint here. But I can get some glue in, which is good. Right, let's try and work this out. So I still have to finish sanding these. I got a little bit of tear out from doing that top round over, but that's why I did it before I did my finish sanding, because I have to go against the grain a little bit because of the curve. So these are ready for finish sanding, but first I want to get the template for my back panel sorted out. So that sits in there. I can mark where the back panel is going to theoretically stop. This is my first pattern I've had. So because of the curve this way, and because of the angle the back sits on, this is not a straight cut. This is not straight. I actually have to kind of scribe a very gentle curve in it this way as well. So I'm going to do that just on my drum sander, fit that, and then I can work out where I need to trim this off. And this will also need a curve through the top. So just be a bit of toing and froing. And I could finally get on to putting the Osmo oil on. I ended up getting my dad to help with that as well. Okay, so eventually made a pattern that works for these back splats, I guess you would call them. So I've got all my blanks here. I can use them as a pattern, trace these out, cut them on the bandsaw, and then just sand up the edges, and they all fit in quite nicely. Alright, so this is the tricky part. Got the backs nicely upholstered. Because of the amount of leather and all the bits that go into upholstery, these have ended up a bit wider than we planned, a bit thicker here, so it's a bit of a tight squeeze getting it into the grooves. So I might have to do some alterations, but at this point, I think I can make it work. It's really a two-man job putting these together, but I ended up having to widen the groove on the top rail, and on the lower rail I could get away with just chiseling out a small piece in the corner where there was an extra fold of leather at that point. Okay, that one's done, everyone. Thanks for watching. So this job took ages. Started in January, I think it was, and we are now in the end of June. So obviously there was lockdown and all sorts of stuff in between there. I'm really happy with how these have turned out. So the next step is to get these into some big pallets, crate them up, and they're getting shipped off to Sydney. Before that happens, I've got another piece to make for the same client, which I've started filming a video on that as well. So hope you enjoyed, and I will see you later.